It is 11 o'clock at night in Sacramento, California, and a nurse we'll call Maria has just finished a 12-hour shift in a crowded emergency room. Her feet ache, her scrubs are stained. Most of her coworkers are driving home to bed. But Maria walks past her car, opens the trunk, pulls out a worn blue backpack full of bandages and blood pressure cuffs, and starts walking toward the freeway overpass at the edge of downtown. Because under that concrete bridge, in the dark, there are patients waiting for her, patients no hospital will ever see, and she is not getting paid a single dollar to be there. Maria is not alone. Across America, in cities like Pittsburgh, Chicago, Phoenix, and Boston, thousands of nurses are doing the exact same thing. They finish brutal hospital shifts, and instead of resting, they walk into homeless encampments, riverbanks, and alleyways with medical supplies on their backs. Tonight, we're going to follow them into that world. And before this story is over, you'll learn about one small item in Maria's backpack that outreach teams say has saved more lives on freezing nights than almost anything else they carry. To understand why these nurses do what they do, you first have to understand the problem they're walking into. On any given night in the United States, more than 650,000 people are homeless. That's roughly the population of a city like Memphis, scattered across sidewalks, tents, cars, and shelters from coast to coast. Many of them are older adults. A growing number are seniors in their 60s and 70s, people who worked their whole lives and lost everything to a medical bill, a rent increase, or the death of a spouse. And here is the part that shocked us the most while researching this story. The average life expectancy for a person living on the street in America is around 50 years old. 50. That's nearly 3 decades shorter than the average American. People on the street die from infections that a week of antibiotics would have cured. They die from untreated diabetes, from heart conditions, from wounds that started as a small blister and turned into something unspeakable. They die from the cold. So why don't they just go to the hospital? It's a fair question, and the answer is complicated. Some have had terrible experiences in emergency rooms, waiting 14 hours only to be discharged back to the sidewalk with a prescription they can't afford. Some struggle with mental illness or addiction and are terrified of institutions. Some have no identification, no insurance, and no way to make or keep an appointment. And some have simply been treated so badly for so long that they've stopped believing anyone in a white coat cares whether they live or die. One retired emergency room nurse in Texas summed it up with a sentence that stayed with us. She said the street doesn't just take your home, it takes your name. After enough years out there, people stop being Robert or Linda or James. They become the homeless guy on 5th Street. And once the world stops seeing you as a person, it stops treating you like one. Which brings us to a doctor in Pittsburgh and a decision he made more than 30 years ago that started all of this. In 1992, a young internal medicine doctor named Jim Withers did something his colleagues thought was crazy. He dressed in old clothes, rubbed dirt into his hair so he wouldn't stand out, and started walking the streets of Pittsburgh at night with a formerly homeless man as his guide. He carried basic medical supplies in a bag and offered care to anyone who would accept it. No clipboard, no billing department, no waiting room, just a doctor kneeling on the pavement next to a human being. Withers called it street medicine, and his simple idea that if patients cannot come to the hospital, then the hospital should go to the patients, grew into a program called Operation Safety Net. That program has now cared for thousands of people in Pittsburgh, and the model spread across the country and eventually around the world. Today, there are street medicine programs in dozens of American cities. And while doctors like Withers get much of the credit, the people carrying most of this movement on their backs, night after night, are nurses. Decades later, that same simple idea would reach a stubborn Army veteran named Robert, living behind a grocery store in Pittsburgh. a man who had refused help from every person who ever offered it. Remember his name? Because we are coming back to him before this story ends. So what does a street nurse actually do out there? The honest answer is almost everything, with almost nothing. Picture a folding chair set up on a sidewalk in Phoenix, Arizona. A nurse in her 50s kneels in front of it with a basin of warm water, gently lifting the feet of a man who hasn't taken his shoes off in 3 weeks. This is foot care, and among street nurses, it is sacred work. Feet are everything when you're homeless. You walk miles every day. You stand in rain, in snow, in 100-degree heat. Wet socks lead to blisters. Blisters lead to infections, and infections, for a diabetic sleeping outside, can lead to amputation or death. So nurses across the country run free foot care clinics, washing, trimming, treating, and bandaging feet that haven't been touched with kindness in years. And something remarkable happens during those 20 minutes. Grown men cry, not from pain, but because someone is holding their feet the way you would for family. One nurse described it this way: the foot washing is just the doorway. What we're really treating is the loneliness. Beyond foot care, these nurses clean and dress wounds, check blood pressure and blood sugar, treat frostbite and burns, hand out medications, and give vaccines. They stitch up cuts by flashlight. They monitor pregnant women living in tents, and they sit with veterans having panic attacks at 2 a.m. Everything they do out there, a hospital would bill hundreds or thousands of dollars for. On the street, the price is zero. If you followed one of these nurses on a typical outreach night, here's roughly how it would go. Around 9 in the evening, a small team gathers in a church parking lot or beside a supply van. They load backpacks with gauze, antiseptic, gloves, protein bars, bottled water, and clean socks. Always socks, because socks are the single most requested item on the street. Then they walk down riverbank trails, behind shopping centers, into tent encampments lit by a single flashlight. They announce themselves gently from a distance, because startling someone who sleeps outside is dangerous for everyone. "Street nurse," they call out. "Anybody need anything tonight?" Some nights they treat 15 people. Some nights they treat 2. And some nights, the most important thing they do is simply sit on a curb next to someone who hasn't had a conversation in a week. The medicine itself would humble any hospital administrator. These nurses learn to improvise the way battlefield medics do. They dress wounds on the tailgate of a pickup truck. They use headlamps instead of exam lights. They keep insulin cool in lunch coolers during summer heat waves and keep it from freezing inside their jackets in winter. There's no lab down the hall and no pharmacy on the second floor. All they have is their training, their judgment, and whatever fits in the bag. But the real work, the part that takes months, is trust. There's a woman in Chicago the outreach nurses spent nearly a year visiting before she would accept anything more than a granola bar. She had been assaulted in a shelter years earlier and refused to go indoors, even in January. So the nurses came to her every week. Same corner, same faces. First it was food, then socks. Then, one freezing night, she finally let a nurse look at a wound on her leg that had been getting worse for months. That wound was infected down to the bone. She was days away from losing the leg, maybe her life. Because a nurse showed up 50 times without asking for anything, she kept both. Chicago, actually, is where some of the most incredible night work happens. An organization there called the Night Ministry operates a health outreach bus, a rolling clinic that drives into the city's toughest neighborhoods after dark. Nurses on board offer medical care, hot food, and a warm place to sit for people who have nowhere else on earth to go. Many of the nurses who volunteer on buses and vans like this come straight from day shifts at major hospitals. They swap one uniform for another and keep going until well past midnight. And it's on those winter nights, in cities like Chicago, Buffalo, and Denver, that this work stops being about comfort and starts being about survival. Here is something the nurses will tell you that most of us never think about. The cold doesn't need a blizzard to kill. Hypothermia, deaths happen at 40 degrees, even 50 degrees, when a person is wet, exhausted, and exposed to wind through the night. The body loses heat quietly. First comes shivering, then numbness, then a strange drowsiness where the person just wants to sleep. Out on the street, that sleep is often the last thing that ever happens to them. Every winter, hundreds of homeless Americans die this way, sometimes just a few blocks from warm buildings. That's why, when you look inside a street nurse's backpack in December, you'll find things you'd never see on a hospital cart. Hand warmers, wool socks, knit hats, and the item we promised to tell you about at the start, the one the outreach teams treat like gold. Compact emergency thermal shells. They look almost like a sleeping bag folded down to the size of a soda can, made of a reflective material that bounces a person's own body heat back at them. There are no batteries and nothing to plug in. A nurse can hand one to someone at midnight, and inside that shell, their own body becomes the furnace that keeps them alive until morning. Outreach workers say these little thermal bags have saved more lives on cold nights than almost anything else they carry. Now, in a minute, we're going to answer the question at the heart of this whole story. Why these nurses keep doing this for free, night after night, because the answer genuinely surprised us. But first, something practical, because this is advice worth taking home for your own family too. Emergency crews recommend that everyone, not just outreach teams, keep a thermal shell like this in the car, especially in winter. If you've ever slid off a snowy road or waited hours for a tow truck with the gas needle dropping, you know how fast a stranded car turns into an icebox. While putting this video together, we found one called TerraShell that's built for exactly this. It packs down small enough to live in a glove box and works the same way the nurses' shells do, reflecting your body heat back so you stay warm with no power at all. If you drive in winter, or you have kids or grandkids who do, it's a simple thing to tuck away and forget about until the day it matters. We've put the link in the description below if you want to take a look. Now, back to those nurses. And the question we promised to answer: why? Why would anyone finish a 12-hour shift with sore feet and an empty stomach and choose to spend 3 more hours kneeling on cold pavement for free? Because make no mistake, these shifts are brutal. American nurses today are stretched thinner than ever. Hospitals are short-staffed. A single nurse might care for 6, 7, 8 patients at once, running from room to room with barely time to eat. Burnout has pushed hundreds of thousands of nurses out of the profession entirely in recent years. By every measure, these are people who have nothing left to give at the end of the day. And yet, when researchers and journalists ask street nurses why they keep coming back, the answers are strangely consistent. In the hospital, they say, the system gets in the way. There are charts to fill, insurance codes to enter, alarms going off, administrators watching the clock. Many nurses say they can go an entire shift without ever really talking to a patient as a person. On the street, all of that disappears. The billing and the paperwork that stand between them and the patient are simply gone, and what's left is one human being caring for another, the way nursing was always supposed to feel. One nurse in Pittsburgh put it beautifully. She said the hospital pays her bills, but the street gives her back her reason. Another, a night shift nurse in Boston, said that after her hardest shifts, going out with the outreach team is the only thing that reminds her why she became a nurse at 19 years old. There's something else too. Many of these nurses are older. A lot of them are women in their 50s and 60s who raised families, worked decades at the bedside, and could be comfortably retired. Instead, they're out at midnight handing warm soup to a stranger. When asked, they often mention their faith, or their mothers, Or a simple sentence that comes up again and again in interviews. That could be my son. That could be my sister. That could be me. And here is something unexpected the nurses themselves talk about. The street gives back. Several described how their homeless patients look out for them in return, walking them safely back to their cars, warning them away from dangerous spots, saving a folding chair for the nurse because she's been on her feet all day. One outreach nurse in Denver said her patients remember her birthday more reliably than some of her relatives do. Out there, gratitude isn't a survey the hospital emails you. It's a man with nothing offering you half of his sandwich because you look tired. Because here's the truth, these nurses see up close every single night. The distance between a warm house and a cold sidewalk is much shorter than any of us want to believe. They treat former teachers, former truck drivers, veterans who served 2 tours, a grandmother who lost her apartment when her husband's medical bills wiped out their savings. The stereotype says people on the street chose this life. The nurses will tell you the street is mostly full of people that life chose for them, and the care they give changes outcomes in ways you can actually measure. When street medicine teams work an area consistently, emergency room visits drop. Infections get caught early instead of becoming amputations. People with diabetes get insulin before they collapse. Studies of street medicine programs have found they save hospital systems enormous amounts of money, sometimes millions of dollars a year, simply by treating small problems on a sidewalk before they become catastrophic problems in an intensive care unit. And this movement isn't just a big city story. Some of the most touching examples we found came from small towns, places where homelessness hides in plain sight. In rural areas, there's often no shelter at all, so people sleep in cars, in barns, in campgrounds at the edge of town. Out there, it's often one nurse, one woman driving a minivan full of supplies down county roads on her day off, checking on the man who lives behind the feed store and the family sleeping in a station wagon at the rest stop. No organization, no funding, no name for what she does. Just a nurse who noticed and couldn't unsee it. But the numbers, honestly, are not the point. The point is the man we told you about earlier. The point is Robert. Robert was a 62-year-old Army veteran living behind a grocery store in Pittsburgh. He had been outside for 11 years and had refused help from everyone. Caseworkers, churches, family, everyone. What finally reached him was a nurse who never once asked him to come inside. She just showed up, week after week, checking his blood pressure, treating the frostbite on his fingers, remembering that he liked his coffee black and that his daughter's name was Anna. It took 2 years. 2 years of Tuesday nights. And then one evening, Robert asked her quietly if that housing program she had mentioned was still available. Today, Robert has an apartment with heat, a bed, and a small photograph of a nurse pinned to his refrigerator. He tells people she is the reason he saw his grandchildren again. Stories like Robert's are happening right now, tonight, in cities all over this country. A nurse in Denver is wrapping a warm blanket around someone's shoulders. A nurse in Phoenix is bandaging feet under a streetlight. A nurse in Chicago is climbing onto an outreach bus after a shift that already broke most people. None of them will be on the news tomorrow. None of them are asking to be. When journalists do manage to interview these nurses, they almost always say the same humble thing. I'm not a hero, I'm just doing what nurses do. But let's be honest with each other. What they're doing is extraordinary. In a country where healthcare often feels cold, complicated, and expensive, these women and men are proving that the oldest kind of medicine still works. Showing up, kneeling down, treating a stranger like family. So the next time you see a nurse at a hospital, a clinic, or anywhere else, remember what you learned tonight. Remember that somewhere in her hospital or in her city, there are nurses who clock out and keep going, carrying backpacks full of bandages toward the people everyone else walks past. And maybe remember this too. You don't need a nursing license to do a version of what they do. A pair of warm socks, a hot meal, a few kind words to someone sleeping outside this winter. The nurses would tell you that's where all of it starts. Not with medicine, but with the decision to see somebody. If this story touched your heart the way it touched ours, tell us in the comments about a nurse or anyone who once showed you this kind of quiet kindness. Those stories deserve to be told, and we read every single one. We share a new true story about everyday Americans restoring our faith in humanity each week, so subscribe if you'd like to see the next one. And thank a nurse this week. She's probably done more than you'll ever know.